soldiers, sailors, and airmen of the Allied Expeditionary Force. You are about to embark upon the great crusade toward which we have striven these many months. The eyes of the world are upon you. The hopes and prayers of liberty-loving people everywhere march with you. In company with our brave allies and brothers in arms on other fronts, you will bring about the destruction of the German war machine, the elimination of Nazi tyranny over the oppressed peoples of Europe, and security for ourselves in a free world. Your task will not be an easy one. Your enemy is well-trained, well-equipped, and battle-hardened. He will fight savagely. But this is the year 1944. Much has happened since the Nazi triumphs of 1940-41. The United Nations have inflicted upon the Germans great defeats in open battle, man to man. Our air offensive has seriously reduced their strength in the air and their capacity to wage war on the ground. Our home fronts have given us an overwhelming superiority in weapons and munitions of war, and placed at our disposal great reserves of trained fighting men. The tide has turned. The free men of the world are marching together to victory. I have full confidence in your courage, devotion to duty, and skill in battle. We will accept nothing less than full victory. Good luck, and let us all beseech the blessing of Almighty God upon this great and noble undertaking.
Welcome to Talk with History. I'm your host, Scott, here with my wife and historian, Jen.
Hello.
On this podcast, we give you insights to our history-inspired world travels, YouTube channel journey, and examine history through deeper conversations with the curious, the explorers, and the history lovers out there. So, Jen, I'm excited because we are starting our road trip series. For those listening, if you follow us on Instagram or YouTube, you might know we traveled for about 2.5 weeks, and we saw a ton of history all across the West. So to celebrate that, Jen, I have a history joke for you.
Okay.
What kind of tea did the American colonists want at the Boston Tea Party?
I don't know.
Liberty. So for those listening, if you like that joke, or perhaps if you have a better one, leave us a review on Apple Podcasts or Spotify, wherever you're listening. The reviews really do help us the show grow. And you know that the History Channel doesn't do jokes like that. Theirs are probably better. So help us out, and let's get more people listening to Talk with History. Before we go into the main subject tonight, this is going to be our first stop on our road trip. We did get another 5-star review on the podcast. This is someone that I actually know, so I'm going to read this out. This is from Jennifer Medeiros Fit is the name. 5 stars, hands down the best history podcast around. Scott and Jen are a dynamic duo and an absolute delight to listen to. My wife and I have been using the podcast and YouTube episodes to help enhance our trips. The tips are so helpful. This is one of those shows that just puts me in a good mood. The more somber topics are treated with reverence and respect they deserve, but beyond that, the show is just plain fun. I strongly recommend to anyone looking for a great podcast that is extremely informative without being overly stuffy or academic. Jason M. So that's a husband and wife. He actually, I used to work with him. He texted me that the other day and just said he's really been enjoying the show. So Jason and Jennifer, thank you so much for the review. It really does mean a lot to get the feedback like that, because right now our listenership is limited. We're growing, and those reviews really do help us. So thank you so much, guys. What are we talking about? What's kind of the first place we stopped on our road trip?
Well, after we stopped in Nashville, we were driving across Kansas, and we saw signs for the Eisenhower Presidential Museum and Library. And we're like, oh my gosh, it's right along the interstate.
Yeah, we hadn't planned on stopping there.
We hadn't planned on stopping there, but it's right off the interstate, and it was a perfect time stop with our kids. And so we stopped at the Dwight D. Eisenhower Presidential Library and Museum.
That's right. So, and I don't think too many commonly know that he is from the middle of nowhere, Kansas.
Yeah, he is from Abilene, Kansas. So that's where we stopped. It's basically the middle of Kansas, and he moved there when he was 2 years old. He was born in Texas, but his family moves there when he's 2, so he considers it his hometown.
Yeah, he was born, I believe, in Denison, Texas.
October 14th.
1890?
1890.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Then we get off the freeway. We're like, hey, this actually works out perfectly for us.
It's right, like it's 10
It was right on our lunch break.
Mm-hmm.
It's a few minutes off the freeway, off the 70. And so we drive in there, and we are smack in the middle of Kansas. There's not much out there.
No.
And it's one of those towns, like the thing that it's known for is being the hometown of Dwight D. Eisenhower.
So it's Eisenhower's Presidential Library, Museum, and Boyhood home. And that's kind of why the museum and library is located there, is because it's kind of built around his boyhood home.
Right.
And the address is 200 Southeast 4th Street in Abilene, Kansas. And it's a 22-acre spread campus. And you can stop there. The admission is free. And it's going to encompass a library, a museum. There's a chapel where he is buried with his wife and son. And then they have like a visitor center where they have a movie and a gift shop. But they also have a nice kind of garden with a statue of him. And of course, his boyhood home.
The thing is we didn't have a ton of time because this wasn't planned for us. We didn't go into the museum. We didn't go inside too much of the stuff. The visitor center a little bit, and then we kind of toured around, like you said, the larger kind of garden area where the statue was, and we saw his resting place.
Yeah, we take you outside of everything. We didn't go in the museum or the library. We go to the statue, we go outside the boyhood home, but we go into the place of meditation, the burial site, and we go into the visitor center.
Yeah, and that's all in the video. I'll link that in the show notes, but kind of let's step back and kind of start from the beginning for here. So tell us a little bit about Ike.
So he's born in Denison, Texas. He's born David Dwight Eisenhower on October 14th, 1890. He's the third of 7 boys. Can you imagine? 7 boys. And he's born to Ida Stover and David Eisenhower. So if you recognize David, it wasn't long. His mother soon reversed his names to avoid confusion. So we know him as Dwight David Eisenhower. But he was born David Dwight Eisenhower. So it wasn't long, 2 years after he's born, they moved to Abilene, Kansas. And the house that you see there, they move into in 1898. So he's actually 8 years old when he moves into that house. But that is the one that survives. That's his boyhood home. And that house is there all the way up until, I think it's 1946, when Ida will pass away.
Okay.
So all the boys are raised there. His father will pass away there. His mother will pass away in 1946. And 1947, it becomes open to the public. So it's given to the National Park Service. So what you see of that boyhood home is the Eisenhowers were the last to live there. And then after Ida passes, it's open to the public for everyone. And what's interesting about that house is that it's all through the war. So I mentioned that in the video, like, they're going to be getting telegrams as their son is the supreme commander of the Allied forces in Germany. So they're going to be getting all that updates, all those telegrams and things along that. They're going to be in that house as that happens. And what's very interesting is Ida was like anti-war.
Oh, interesting.
She did not believe in the war, but she had some books about war in the house, and he read them as a young kid, and he was very interested in it. But what actually happened for Eisenhower is they don't come from a lot of means, right? And so him and his older brother decided, we will go to college in tandem. You go a year, I'll work to pay for you to go. I'll go a year and you pay to work while I go, and we'll finish college back and forth like that. Kind of think of It's a Wonderful Life.
Yeah.
When him and his brother are like, I'm going to work to pay for you and you can work, Well, what happens is his brother is doing so well, he asks to stay another year. Ike is like, yes, I'll work some more to pay for you to stay in college. And then someone says to him, you could go to like the academies for free. And he's like, oh, I never really thought about that. So he applies to the Naval Academy and West Point. Now he gets an appointment for both, but he's too old at the time to go to the Naval Academy.
Oh, no way.
So he goes to West Point. So he goes to West Point in 1915 when he actually graduates Abilene High School in 1909.
Oh, wow. So he was older going through.
Oh, wait. So he graduates in 1915.
Okay.
So, yeah, he's class of 1909. He gets his appointment to West Point in 1911. So 2 years after he's graduated.
Okay.
And then, so he's older, and he's an average student. He's not,
he's not top of his class.
He's not at top of his class. He's not MacArthur,
right?
The highest ever graduate from West Point, which is interesting because he'll work for MacArthur, and they're both 5-star generals in the end. But so he graduates in 1915, and he does it because it's free.
Huh.
So you can understand.
I mean, that's why I went to the Naval Academy.
And that's why I got
my parents didn't have to pay.
Exactly. And that's why I got the ROT scholarship to Penn State. So he saw the same means that we saw, right? We're able to get an education through service.
That's so interesting. And it kind of makes me wonder what that conversation was like with his mom, who's kind of, obviously, we find out later, kind of anti-war, right? And here is his son going to West Point, right? One of the most prestigious military academies in the world. I'm sure back then, and if you think about it, right? If he's born in 1890 and here it is, let's say 20 years later, right? He goes approximately when he's 20. That's not that long after that mentality of getting your start in the world through the military is still it must have still been in the culture back then. Because even think about when we talk about Civil War and American Revolution, a lot of businessmen either went into the military when conflicts happened, or they got their start there to kind of get themselves established.
Absolutely. Like even when you think of Hamilton, he keeps saying, I wish there was a war where we could make our name.
Right.
Right? Because he has no means. He's coming from no means. So this was a way for young men who wanted to make their name for themselves to really establish themselves in society. And when you think about other people who have done this, I remember Lincoln's son, Robert. He wants to join the Civil War, right? Because even as a gentleman who has means and he's able to go to school, he still wants to be a part of it because this really is at the time, and maybe even so today, men really measured this as your service, as, you have established yourself as a man in society. You're defending something. You're a part of something. You're, serving your country.
Yeah. I mean, and obviously military service is still highly respected today, right? And that's come and gone in waves, in the country, depending on conflicts going on. But back then, I think it was still even more so that old school mentality of seen very, very highly in society as like, oh, you're an Army officer or you're a naval officer, right? That's, they do this in movies. Women even sought out, oh, he's a captain in the Army or the Navy or whatever it is.
Yeah.
So that's interesting that he went to West Point.
Yeah. So he went to West Point. It's not even long. So he's graduating in 1915. He gets married in 1916. So he meets Mamie Dowd. They meet in Texas. She's from Iowa.
And you know what? If you see young pictures of Dwight Eisenhower, he is a handsome man.
He is a very handsome man.
Like, you could look it up and watch our video. Yeah. But you look up some young videos of him and his wife, like when he's still at the military academy.
Picture, yeah.
He is a good-looking guy.
If you look at their wedding picture, she's sitting and he's standing with his arms crossed. He didn't want to wrinkle his uniform. Yeah. That's why he's not sitting down. But he's very handsome. Yeah. And they get married, I think, in someone's living room. So it's of that time, again, where marriages happen relatively quickly. And as you can imagine, World War I, we're on the cusp of World War I here. So he doesn't get to go over for World War I, but he ends up training a tank crew. And he will do that in 1918. He will get stationed outside of Gettysburg. And that'll be more relevant later.
Okay.
When we get to the Eisenhower Gettysburg Ranch. So it's an area he always loved, and that he's stationed out there training a tank crew. And then, he's going to, of course, work his way up in the military. By World War II, he's chief of staff. He's chief of staff for MacArthur. And then he becomes Supreme Allied Commander of the Expeditionary Forces for Germany.
Yep.
And that's when he becomes a 5-star general in 1944. But he's a part of 2 big campaigns that really make his name. Operation Torch in North Africa, a very big tank-driven operation, and then D-Day invasion of Normandy in 1944.
If you're listening and you haven't seen our video on this, I actually found, I think it was a CBS interview, where he goes back with Walter Cronkite to Normandy 20 years after D-Day.
Yes.
And so it's really, really neat. So I put that footage in the video, and I highly encourage you to go watch it because it's really neat to see Eisenhower. I mean, he's talking about all these movements. He's talking about the operation. He's talking about all the stuff like he remembered it yesterday.
I went over to a field from which the American airborne, started out. Now, I couldn't go to all these fields because there were many of them. But I did go into the 101st Division, and it was a very fine experience. They were getting ready, and all camouflaged, and their faces blackened and all this. And there they saw me, and of course they'd recognize me. They said, "Now quit worrying, General. We'll take care of this thing for you." And that kind of thing was a good feeling.
Yeah, and what I really appreciated about that interview, and we'll talk about this more, what he says is important to him. So he has two sons, and his first son, Dowd, which is his wife's maiden name, is born a year after they're married. And Dowd will actually pass away at 3 years old from scarlet fever. Eisenhower is reluctant to ever discuss his death. And that is when I talked about the place of meditation where Eisenhower is buried with his wife. Their son is also buried there. Son was initially buried in Denver, Colorado, but when they're both interred there in Abilene, Kansas, they reinter their son with them. And when they have a second son, John, who's born in 1922, and he graduates from West Point on D-Day, 1944. And that's what Eisenhower says he remembers, right? I remember D-Day, but I remember thinking of the young men who are doing this, who are actually in this operation. And I think of my son, because he's so tied to it. Not only is he ordering men to this fight, his son is going to be a part of this fight. And this is his only surviving child. So it's, for me, it says a lot about the man, that's what he remembers about that day. And the quote that I really love, like when you think that this is happening in 1944 and you're going to actually get the surrender of Germany in May of 1945, a month later, he's going to give the quote,
"The proudest thing I can claim is that I am from Abilene."
He says that in June of 1945. So a month after the German surrender for World War II, that's the proudest thing. To me, it just says a lot about the character of the man. And so to be in Abilene, Kansas, and see that place that he's proud of, to see where he's really tethered and anchored, it does say a lot about who he is. And I appreciated being there and being a part of that.
Yeah, hearing his perspective in that interview, and it was a 90-minute interview, and I didn't end up watching the whole thing. I tried to find some of the interesting bits for our video, but hearing his perspective on what he thought about, like you said, his son graduating from West Point on D-Day, the day that this is happening, and he basically says,
Walter, this D-Day has a very special meaning for me. My mind goes back so often to this fact. On D-Day, my own son graduated from West Point. And after his training with his division, he came over with the 71st Division, but that was some time after this event. But on the very day he was graduating, these men came here, British and our other allies, Americans, to storm these beaches for one purpose only: not to gain anything for ourselves, not to fulfill any ambitions that America had for conquest, but just to preserve freedom.
they're not doing it for themselves, they're not doing it for glory, they're doing it for freedom.
Yes.
And just kind of hearing that perspective from him, again, this was 20 years after the fact, right? So 64.
Yes.
Was really moving watching that. And so, again, I highly encourage you to kind of go watch our video, because that's a really neat piece of that interview to kind of hear directly from the man himself.
I wanted to bring up some other things about Eisenhower as well. he will be the 34th president of the United States from 1953 to 1961. So he's the president right after Truman, right after World War II. And then JFK is going to be after him. So you think we have like, it's kind of like out with the old and with the new with JFK. But him and JFK actually got along very well. And Eisenhower is a two-term president, 1953 to 1961. So you think 8 years he's president of the United States. There's a lot of opinions about Eisenhower and maybe some follies that he had, but the two things I really remember about his presidency for me is the civil rights of 1957 when he brought the Army troops in to enforce the federal orders to integrate Little Rock, Arkansas. Little Rock, Arkansas. To me, that said a lot about the man. Plus, we were in Newport, Rhode Island at the house that he was playing golf at when he grabbed the phone and called in the federal troops.
Oh, I don't think I remember
he was
that.
playing golf on the golf course when he was here, and like they're creating a ruckus down there, and he's like, okay, I'm not dealing with this. Federal troops are going to go in and get these kids into the school.
Wow.
So he's like doing this on the golf course, which he got a lot of criticism for the golf. And then the interstate system. So we were on the interstate system stopping to see Eisenhower when Eisenhower really is the one who started the interstate system in America. And it's, it's officially known as the Eisenhower interstate system. And for him, he saw the importance of the Autobahn in Germany and how much it really connected the country, that he came back to America and installed that here in our country. So those are the two things I really think of when I think of the Eisenhower presidency. The Eisenhower Gettysburg Ranch.
Yes.
So we have a video from there.
We do. That was actually our first video on him, was you going out there and doing
yes. That. So there's other things that we've kind of connected ourselves with Eisenhower. They buy this ranch outside of Gettysburg because, again, he's trained there. He likes the area. It's close to D.C. It's close enough. And maybe as a military spouse has never had a home where she can display the things they buy from different countries or the place they're stationed.
Yeah,
and
we totally get that.
We totally get that. So she asked for a place where we can have that, even if we're still moving, because this is before he becomes president, we can come back to and I can have a house that I can decorate. So in 1950, they buy this ranch right outside of Gettysburg. I mean, it's like literally adjacent to the battlefield.
Yep.
And the National Park Service takes care of it today. So it's like you can visit Gettysburg Visitor Center and they'll say, oh, this is Gettysburg, the Eisenhower Ranch. It's open today too. You can take a bus over from there. So in 1950, they buy this farm, Gettysburg Farm, and it's their retreats, even when he's in office as president. So when he comes into the presidency, they will go to the Gettysburg Farm as a retreat. And as a result, Khrushchev will visit them there. Churchill will visit them there. Nixon, his vice president, visits him there. Reagan visits him there.
And there's a lot of footage of that.
Yeah.
So I put some of that footage, I think, in the Gettysburg Farm, his Gettysburg estate video. I put the video of Churchill. There's a video of him and Churchill driving around on his farm, showing off his cows, because that's, you said in the video, that's what he liked to do.
He liked to show people, his breeding system for cows.
It was really, really neat. And I can see, especially in that area, right? It's so open and so green. It's a beautiful area out there in Gettysburg. I can see why they would want to settle down there.
So it kind of reminds me of the Boyhood home.
Yep.
So here's the Boyhood home that his family has lived in pretty much their whole life since he's 8, until his mother passes away and it goes to National Park Service. So here's the farm, the Gettysburg Farm, that they will live in after his presidency. They will go and retire to that farm. That's where they spend the rest of their years until Ike dies, and then maybe stays there until she dies. And the very next year, the National Park Service will open it up.
Well, and I believe, and you mentioned this in the Gettysburg video, that he is the reason that Camp David isn't too far from there, right?
Yes.
The Camp David that all the presidents kind of go to retreat. It's named after his grandson.
So it used to be called Shangri-La, and then he called it Camp David after his grandson. It's still called Camp David today.
Yep.
And that's Eisenhower's grandson.
Yeah, and it was neat too, some of the comments that we got on this video, because some of our audience, like you said, everybody's got different opinions, but some of our audience, remember him being around. And so some of them reached out, like I think Abel, she comments on our videos all the time, and she talks about like, and she actually had like a personal experience with him when she was a young girl. And so they were watching some debate, her and her grandmother or her mother or something like that. And she was close enough where I guess there were the people who were debating or other people in the political parties around were kind of taken with her mother or her grandmother, whoever it was. And she was close enough to the president. The president kind of like said hello to her because she was the same age as his grandson.
Yes.
And so she was very polite and, said hello back, and he just kind of, patted her on the head, and then she watched the proceedings like with the president, right there. So I think Rick was someone else who comments on our videos a fair amount. And he brought up, like you said, some of the follies, in his opinion, some of the things they did with bringing down, certain dictators around the world, right, that led to future events and this, that, and the other. So it's always going to be opinions one side or the other.
Absolutely. But even Rick said he still sees him as number 3.
Oh, yeah, top 3. Presidents. I mean, I think his example was the interstate highway system. Yeah. He said President Eisenhower had used the CIA to depose Prime Minister Mohammad Mossadegh to overthrow and consolidate the rule of Mohammad Reza Pahlavi.
Yeah.
And so bringing down that person actually kind of cleared the way for Ayatollah Khomeini.
I know.
And then the American hostage crisis in 1979.
And then the Iran Revolution.
Right.
Yeah.
And nobody can foresee that.
You can't foresee that.
You can't foresee that. So, but everything has a cause and effect.
It does. But Eisenhower was so respected, just like you said, that even JFK, Bay of Pigs, he still consults with Eisenhower, right? And because Eisenhower is a military man. And we talked about this in my video. Someone tries to correct me and says, don't call him General Eisenhower, call him President Eisenhower. People like to be referred to as the highest rank they ever had. Yes, except for Eisenhower, because Eisenhower actually asked the standing president, who was John F. Kennedy, can you put my name back to General Eisenhower instead of President Eisenhower? I would like to be considered a general. And JFK didn't understand that request, but he did it because even though JFK is a military man himself, but he doesn't rise to the rank of 5-star general. And, there are 5 5-star generals. And if you can remember, it's Brady, Marshall, Arnold, MacArthur, and Eisenhower. And so when you're one of 5, you can imagine you want to be remembered as that because you're not one of 5 presidents, right? You're 40-something now. Sure. But his statue in Abilene, Kansas is him in uniform. And we talk a little bit about the jacket he's wearing from the Army is even today referred to as an Eisenhower jacket.
Yep, the Ike jacket.
So you don't even, I really didn't even put 2 and 2 together when I was in the military. Grab your Eisenhower. Where's my Eisenhower? You just know that's what the jacket is called. But I never really thought it's because of President Eisenhower. And President Eisenhower, or General Eisenhower, is actually buried in full military uniform.
Yeah, you do talk about that. And again, I think that really speaks to the man that we got to briefly visit, right? To briefly visit his home smack in the middle of Kansas, Abilene, Kansas. It just kind of made me smile the whole time to see this kind of true American story of someone who came from, not much means, right? They moved from Texas to Kansas for whatever reason it was. It's not like there was much there in Kansas back in the day. There was no presidential library there because there was no president from there yet. And here he was, kind of made his way up through West Point, all the way up to 5-star general, eventually president, and settled down after that. So it was really, really neat to visit him and to see that and to kind of walk his footsteps, put that in a video and share that with everybody. So for those listening, thank you for listening to this podcast, our first episode on our road trip series. We really do appreciate it. Stick around for the next few weeks. Share this with your friends because we have a whole lot of Western history coming up. So we kept going west, after we visited Abilene, and we've got Buffalo Bill Cody, we've got Wild Bill Hickok and Deadwood and Little Bighorn, all sorts of fun topics coming up. If you want to support the show and you enjoy these podcasts, you can support us at talkwithhistory.com/support. We rely on you, our community, to grow, and we appreciate you all every day. We'll talk to you next time.
Thank you.
Is the coast of Normandy, whose beaches, gold, Juno, Sword, Utah, and Omaha now live in history. Along this narrow stretch of sand and sea, a battle was joined between the world of freedom and the world of tyranny. For nearly 5 terror-filled years, hundreds of millions of people lived under the Nazi jackboot that had enslaved Europe. The Allied troops were fighting to win a foothold at first and total victory. And if possible, to carve out a dream of a world without war. 20 years ago, in this, our own time, the largest invasion in history assaulted Hitler's European fortress. Beaches were beachheads then, and the world was at war.
This is the last alerting announcement from Supreme Headquarters, Allied Expeditionary Force, General Dwight D. Eisenhower.
Soldiers, sailors, and airmen of the Allied Expeditionary Force, you are about to embark upon the great crusade toward which we have striven these many months. The eyes of the world are upon you.